Well, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever. Glad to have all y'all here. We got a few things we need to cover. First of all, right now we're selecting people to be on our board and as officers in the Historical Society for next year. If any of you know somebody who's in the society and would like to be an officer or on the board, please get in touch with Paul White or David Hollifield. They are the nominating committee. Give them the names and let them go from there. Also, Paul is our lead guy on the museum, so if you would, Paul, I'd like you to give us a little update on the museum.
I'm Paul White, if any of you don't know me, and some of you might not be aware that we've been working toward having a town museum. To give you a little quick background, most of you probably know where the Women's Club is downtown, which is on property owned by the town of Wendell. The town owned that block except for the house that was behind it. That house originally belonged to the littlest police chief in the United States, and he was ours. His name was Elliot Wall. And that house was purchased recently, the property in the house, by the town of Wendell. And then they have provided it through a lease with zero payments to the Historic Society for a museum. We're in the process of working with G&G builders to go in and update it and get it into shape to use it as a museum. The goal would be sometime in up to 4 or 5 months from now to open it, and we'll have a museum committee that will go in and put it together. Things have been, Historic Society, SID, and several others have been saving up things for and putting things together for the museum for how long, Sid? Ever? Long time. Wendell has a lot of history, and now we're actually going to have a place to display it. For the people on the board, to get started, we're waiting on a few more figures from G&G. That last meeting, we wanted to look into refinishing the hardwood floors that are in there. He's getting his figures on that, which I'm still waiting on. He's looking at, we didn't vote to do it, but we're looking at a floor to go in the kitchen also, so we could examine that. And he's looking at the electrical service. Once we've got that put together, we're going to proceed to get the building ready and turn it into a museum. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. As far as that museum goes, we have a reverse raffle every year that helps fund that. And if all of you don't have your tickets yet, you can get them here tonight. We have tickets. We have not just these few. Mary Jo has a wad of them over here. So you just let us know if you need tickets.
Ray's got some, and Judy Edwards has some.
Everybody you're sitting beside probably has some. So if you're not beside somebody that has some, just raise your hand. We'll find you. Okay, without further ado, Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you. Steve's our vice president in charge of programs. He's going to introduce our program for tonight.
Well, thanks for coming out. I think we're going to have a pretty interesting and certainly educational program tonight. But before we start on that, one thing we haven't addressed is membership in the Historical Society. If any of you are not members, this would be a great time to consider joining. It's a pretty exclusive thing, and it's hard to get into, but if you'd like to join, while you're here tonight, there are people here that can help you with the background check and those kinds of things. So consider joining if you haven't joined, and help us preserve the history of Wendell. So the program tonight, well, let me tell you one other thing before we start. This cooler over here has water in it, and I would encourage you guys to get a drink of water, because sometimes when Alvin turns these snakes loose, your mouth gets dry, you know? So feel free to get a drink of water if you'd like. Our speaker tonight is Alvin Braswell. Alvin is a friend of mine. We were undergraduates at NC State together just under 100 years ago. And Alvin was a very conscientious student, unlike some other students there, and has done very well for himself. He is currently the interim director of the Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh. He retired from the museum, and they called him back to be the interim director. So they think a lot of him, and he's a very knowledgeable guy. So I'm going to turn it over to Alvin Braswell to give you your program this evening.
Okay. Oh, wait. We up and running? Okay, good. Well, good evening. Glad to see all of you here. The Wendell Historical Society, I presume, deals mostly with cultural aspects. Tonight, I want to give you a feel for some of the natural history of the area. And there are some really interesting things here that are pretty unique for this part of the state. And so I'll go ahead and jump into this and tell you a little bit about some of the things that you might not know live next to you. First, let's deal with Robertson Mill Pond for a little bit. Most all of you probably know the place. I hope many of you have visited it, and if you haven't, that you will. It's a wonderful facility that the Wake County Parks, Rec, and Open Space has there. They do rental kayaks and canoes, and there's a beautiful trail back through the cypress swamp. And about a year back, the Carolina Wetlands Association presented Wake County Parks, Rec, and Open Space with a plaque designating Robertson's Mill Pond as a wetland treasure. It has many aspects of wetlands that are quite valuable to us for a number of reasons. Now, if you're a botanist, it's a great place to visit. Interesting, you've got a cypress swamp in there that is typical of coastal situations, and here it is in the Piedmont. This little finger of habitat comes up Buffalo Creek and to this area, and this is native cypress. This isn't something that people planted there. And there are a number of things associated with that in the form of animals that are basically coastal plain animals that here they occur up in the edge of the Piedmont. But there's beautiful vegetation in there, the cypress trees, cardinal flower, swamp rose, and a whole range of other things. So if you're interested in plants, it's a good place to visit. One historical aspect of Buffalo Creek is there's a little fish there called the saw-cheek darter. And Buffalo Creek near Wendell was the type locality for that species. It was described in 1935, and the specimen that was used as an example to define that species came from Buffalo Creek. There's about 31 species of fish that are documented in Buffalo Creek. So there's a lot of diversity there. Let's move on to our reptiles and amphibians now. There's a large contingent of species that are found in the Wendell area. About 18 species of salamanders, 17, possibly 18 species of frogs, 9 turtles, 8 species of lizards, 23 snake species that are here. So that's a total of about 75 species. And one of the things we're going to dwell on a little bit tonight, because it's been in the news a lot, and that's copperhead. So when we finish tonight, I want everybody in here to be able to identify a copperhead. One of the reasons that there's such diversity in the area, in the wetland habitats, you've got ephemeral ponds, you've got spring seepages, you've got freshwater marshes and swamp forest. There's a whole diversity of aquatic and wetland habitats. And the salamanders said 18 species. Well, I'll show you a few of those. There's too many of them to talk about. If I get going, I'll go for hours here. So I'm depending on Steve to sort of wave at me and say. But here a beautiful species that does area is the eastern mud salamander. These can go up to about 7 inches or so in length. It's a good-sized salamander. The marbled salamander is the official state salamander for North Carolina. 3-line salamander, kind of hard to find, but they're there. There is. The southern 2-line salamander is a very common species around most of the wetlands and streams. And the little dwarf salamander, Chamberlain's dwarf salamander, is one of the smallest salamanders we have in the state. And if you get in the right habitat and know how to look and hold your mouth just right, you can find them in there. But they're literally about that big as adults. Long, skinny thing. talking about the hidden diversity or some of the strange things that salamanders or amphibians do, I thought I'd use the spotted salamander as an example. They're a beautiful critter. I've got a live one up here you can look at later. Nice adult. Breed in the winter. January, February, March, typically. Around February is the height of their breeding season. They live up in the woods. And on a good warm rainy night for that time of year, it can be, warm rain that night time of year might be 40 to 45 degrees. They'll come out of their holes in the ground and hike down through the woods to an aquatic situation. Ephemeral ponds, fish-free habitats are best for them, but they can be successful in the edge of waterways that have fish in them if there's enough leaf cover or vegetation so that when the little larvae hatch, fish don't eat them. So they hike down there and they lay their eggs. If you look at this, there's quite a diversity of the way those eggs look. Now, when one of them lays its eggs, there may be a clump about the size of your thumb. And then the gelatin in there starts absorbing water. And that little clump that big will end up as big as your fist or bigger once it's fully expanded. There'll be 3 gelatinous layers around the eggs, 2 around the individual eggs and 1 around the whole mass. See, some of them are clear. There's a cloudy one, and here's some that look greenish. You'll see all that in the same pool where they're breeding. The cloudy one is just the gelatin itself is cloudy. The eggs are fine in there. There's been some research done. There's research at Penn State that looked into that seriously, and they never could really figure out why. The green is a commensal algae that only lives in spotted salamander egg masses. And it doesn't harm them, and there's some research ongoing right now. Again, a researcher from Pennsylvania and one at UNC Wilmington, trying to look at the possibility that oxygen that's produced by that green algae is maybe even helping the larvae in there. But there's no indication it harms the egg masses at all. The egg mass, when the young are developing, you can see them curved in eggs. Those are probably a week or so away from hatching. They have glands on the side of the head that when they're ready to hatch, those glands make a secretion that eats a hole right through the gelatin. So they just burrow right out through the gelatin, come out of the mass, and start to feed after a few days. And when they're near maturity, a larvae has nice external gills, maybe about this big. When they get big enough, they will then resorb the gills and they come out on land. You have a juvenile that looks like this. And about 2 to 4 years after that, that juvenile would be an adult that looks like this. Now the reddish on the head on here varies somewhat. You find a higher percentage of population in the mountains in North Carolina that have those real bright red spots. It does occur here, but many of the adults here will just have yellow spots on the head like on the body. But the spots don't move once they're mature. You can photograph one and use that kind of like fingerprints. If you're studying these, next year if you catch a salamander and you look at it, you can match that photo up with ones you took before and see if it's the same one that came back. One of the characteristics of really high quality wetlands is stability. If you get a lot of flooding over it, it tends to disrupt the vegetation, the animal communities. It picks up stuff and washes it away. If it's a ephemeral pond, it's fish-free. Sometimes it'll introduce fish in it, which then will eat up the salamander and frog tadpoles and larvae. So stability is important. With this particular salamander, the four-toed salamander, it's a species of special concern in North Carolina. They live up in the woods, like hardwood forest. They breed right down along the edge here. They actually lay their eggs in this moss that overhangs the water. When the eggs hatch, the little larvae will wiggle out and they'll go down in the water. And they grow up. Say grow up, they only get about that big before they're big enough to metamorphose back to a terrestrial animal, little thing. The adult's only about this big. But if you get a flood situation and water covers up that moss, it actually will drown the eggs. That's one of the reasons these are not nearly as common as they used to be, because with our development, hard surface areas, we get a lot more fluctuation along stream courses. And so where you find these now is where there's a good quality drainage basin. It minimizes the amount of flooding so that they can still manage to stay in there and reproduce and replace themselves in the population. Show the bottom of this salamander. It's the only salamander we have that has an immaculate white belly with little sort of black pepper-like spots on it. And we do have those at Robertson's Mill Pond area. Now here's a salamander. It's actually common in this area in some places. Many people have never seen it. These things can get 3 feet long. It's the amphibian. Be a big thing like that, about that big around. Have little tiny legs, two little ones up here, virtually useless. They're permanently aquatic. They do come out on land occasionally, and we'll travel a little bit over land on a real warm or rainy night. But they typically stay in the water and sometimes in shallow water. They eat a wide variety of things, pretty much whatever they can get in their mouth, in the way of little frogs, fish, you name it. A unique character of this, though, is they have the largest red blood cells of any animal, and they have been important in medical research. It's a lot easier to look at the blood cells. But they're here, and they're actually quite common in places like Robertson's Mill Pond. But to see them, typically you have to set minnow traps overnight. You can bait them with something like Vienna sausages. And then you have to set it, though, because they do have lungs and they breathe air. If it gets below the water completely, you can drown them. So they have to be very careful in sets. And when we're studying these, we're very careful with our minnow traps to be sure that we put them in a way so that they don't get in deeper water and get underneath. What that does promote on occasion is a friendly raccoon or otter will come along, pick up the trap and set it on the bank and try to get at whatever's in it. So I've had instances where I set 10 traps and 8 of them were out on the bank the next morning. We have salamanders that are fish intolerant, those that breed in ephemeral ponds, and the fish would eat up their larvae. But there are other species that are tolerant of fish for one reason or another. And again, Buffalo Creek is notable in that we have both the lesser siren and the greater siren that occur there. The greater siren can go over to 2 feet long, have external gills, and they only have 2 legs up front. No evidence in their skeleton or anything that they ever had back legs. They're really unique in that regard. Some people consider them an entirely different group from the amphibians. Like you have sirens and then you have amphibians. But we have both species that occur there. And these are basically coastal plain animals. But they come back up here into the Piedmont, that habitat. And then there's the old newt. Some of you may have seen newts in pet stores, the eastern newt, or the red-spotted newt. The adults are aquatic, and they occur in ponds with fish, being farm ponds and marshes, freshwater marshes and the like. They're toxic enough that fish don't eat them, so they can live in those habitats quite nicely. They lay their eggs in aquatic vegetation, and they hatch, and the larvae looks kind of like the larvae of that spotted salamander. But when they get big enough, most of the time they'll metamorphose into a terrestrial juvenile stage called a red eft. And they'll live out on land for a year, 2, 3 years or so till they get mature size. Then they march back down to the pond and crawl in and had to go through a second metamorphosis into the adult stage, which is greenish in color. Now we have two subspecies of this in the state. In this area we have the red-spotted newt, but if you go just a little bit to the south and east, they start to transition over to where the eft has these broken lines or stripes on it. It's called the broken stripe newt. If you get down around Wilmington, they're all like that. But between here and there, there's sort of a transition zone where the spots start to get elongated and turn more into stripes. Now, let's switch over to frogs. How many people like frogs? Okay. If you do a little yard pond, you have to be careful not to put it under your bedroom window. Because if you get the gray tree frogs or something like that calling there, it can keep you awake at night. So it's a good idea with your yard ponds to push them back from the house a little bit. But there's a frog that's very common in this area. They'll start calling usually in December, sometimes January. They're usually going strong. It's the spring peeper. You hear this call. They can be in big choruses. And what it tells you is there's a wetland there. Some kind of a little pond or something that they're using. And when you get them out, you can see them like this. They're pretty obvious. But the rest of the year, they're up in the woods somewhere. And how does that little thing get all kinds of other things it like to eat survive? One of the ways they do is being cryptic. They blend in. It's hard to see them. You see the one here in the leaf? If you were walking by, if that frog didn't move, you'd never see it. Same with a bird or something like that might like to eat it. So that's a strategy that they use. We have this large number of frogs here, and if you get around wetlands or ponds, you'll see frogs that are fish tolerant, and you'll get around some more isolated wetland situations. You have frogs that are fish intolerant, as far as where they lay their eggs and where the tadpoles grow up. Then there's some that are sort of in between. Well, the green tree frog is in between. They love cattails, and if you've got a big lake or something with a lot of cattails in an area, in this area, chances are really good you've got a good population of green tree frogs there. They'll sit out in the day. If you go in the edge of the cattails and you look good, you can see them sitting on the leaves. And if you look real close, there's another one right here on the back side of that. There's two beautiful frogs. They will come to your house at night on occasion when you have a light and sit there and try to catch insects. And if you're really lucky, one will get on a window where you can see his belly, and he'll eat a lightning bug. And it'll flash in his belly. Now, probably the most common tree frog we have here is the Cope's gray tree frog. I have one of those up here live that you can see. They're fish intolerant where they breed. In many instances, the adults won't even lay eggs in a pond that smells like fish. There's been some research on that. Just put fishy water out for somewhere, and they don't use it. No fish in there, but there was a fish in there, and the water smells like fish. Yeah, bird baths, swimming pools, little bitty things. I've got a half dozen things around my house that these things try to breed in. And there are times when there's so many of them calling that one pond I built down behind the house is about 30 feet by 40 feet in size and about 3 feet deep, built specifically for frogs and salamanders. And they can be so loud that it gets painful to hear. So there's times I've been there and I just holler, "Shut up!" and get them to quit. They go, "Ah, thanks." And then they start back up. The barking tree frog is our largest tree frog in the state, and they do occur in this area. They're again another species that cannot tolerate fish. So if somebody's got sometimes a cattle water hole, something out in the field, but there's no fish in it, they'll use places like that. It can be permanent water, but it has to be no fish. Again, a more coastal species, but they have moved back into this area. First records were around 1980, as we were starting to warm up and having some warmer winters. The green tree frog and the barking tree frog both moved inland. Squirrel tree frog occurs in many spots back into the edge of the Piedmont, coastal plain species, but they're a hitchhiker. I was down at Buxton back in May, and I came back, and I had 3 of these on my car. And I didn't know that until just shortly after I got back. The next night it started raining a little bit, and I hear a squirrel tree frog calling. I go, ah. I go out and look, and here's one under the hood, here's one under the door, or in the seam by the door, and another one back by the hatch on the back. And so they do that, and then so there's little populations that's popped up around Raleigh all the way back to Winston-Salem, where they'll just hitch a ride and show up, and all you need is one male and one female and a nice little pond, and they get started. But they're a nice little frog, and they do love to come to lights around houses at night. And if you're down at the coast, say in a motel or have a house, just go out at night if there's a light on the side of it, and you'll be very likely to see a green tree frog or 2 sitting there. We have toads. We have 2 large species that are common in this area, the American toad and the Fowler's toad. We have the eastern spadefoot toad, which is not nearly as common in Wake County as they used to be, but there's still a couple of spots around it we know they occur. The American toad breeds typically in February or March. Fowler's toad in April or May. If weather conditions push them together, sometimes you get hybridization. Because a male toad in the breeding season is pretty indiscriminate about who he grabs onto. I'll demonstrate that in just a minute here. The eastern spadefoot will breed any time of the year you have huge rains. But it's a fish intolerant species. These toads are fish tolerant because the tadpoles are toxic. They can breed in a pond with lots of bass and bluegill and catfish in it. You'll sometimes see these little swarm of blackish tadpoles along the edge. It'll be toad tadpoles, and things don't eat them because they're a combination of toxin and it tastes bad. I once saw a fishing spider grab one, and I was doing a teacher workshop. I had a white plastic tray and had a few toad tadpoles in it and had a fishing spider put in there. And it grabbed one of those toad tadpoles, and it just sat still for a minute like, ugh, what have I got? And then it turned the tadpole loose, and its legs just sort of curled in like this, and it rolled over on its side. About 15 minutes later, it perked back up, and but it didn't go grab another tadpole. Now, I put this slide in here as an illustration. Those are both Fowler's toads. But the Fowler's toad and the American toad come in a lot of different color variations. So you can't use color, the basic ground color, as an identifying character on those species. There are other things, the number of warts in a spot, the size of the cranial crest, top of the head, and a few other things that you have to use to tell them apart. Now, all these frogs call. They all have a unique call. It's like if you're a birder, and you're a real good birder, you can go out and you don't have to see the bird. You just hear it call and you know what species it is. Same with frogs. And that's a lot of fun at times to go out at night and you hear the different frogs, and it does tell you where they're at too, so it's easier to find them when they're calling. But there's frog call surveys that go on, some organizing where people actually survey year after year. Same. Leopard frog and the pickerel frog have egg masses that are sort of like that, sort of round. And there'll be 4,000 or 5,000 eggs in that mass, a whole lot of eggs. The toads, Fowler's toad and American toad, lay these long strings of eggs, sort of spiral. So if you see that, you know you've got toads there. Gray tree frogs eggs float at the surface of the water. And things like a little narrowmouth toad, I'll show you in a little bit, their eggs float at the surface also. Then it's after a good night of activity, when it's been a good rain and they're breeding, in the pond behind my house, I've had it, oh gosh, you can't count the number of eggs that are there, since the whole surface of the pond is covered with eggs. And those hatch into tadpoles, and after an appropriate period of time, they'll metamorphose into the terrestrial frogs. Now, the toads, they have different strategies there. Now, your toads, American toad, Fowler's toad, they metamorphose into little froglets coming out. They only have a body length like this, big little things. And there are times if you get a rain after a bunch of them have come out and they're staying close to the edge of the pond where it's moist and it rains and they spread out, you can have little frogs just showing up all over the place. Thus, the old wives' tale about raining frogs. Because here it rains and gosh, here are all these little frogs all over the place. Well, they didn't come down from up there. They're just taking advantage of it being wet to scatter out into the habitats. Okay. Now, some of you fish tolerant, and these are frogs that a lot of you see and know. Everybody has heard of the bullfrog. And the green frog, or sometimes called banjo frog. They have a call that's like, boom, boom, like a pluck on a banjo string. And the bullfrog is a big bellow. The pickerel frog is a snore. And the leopard frog is sort of chuckles and grunts. They're called, so they're very distinctive. Now, the bullfrog, you've heard stories about eating bullfrog legs and all. They can be quite good. The green frog typically doesn't get into that category where people try to harvest those. But all of these eat a lot of insects and things. The bullfrog will eat virtually anything it can get in its mouth. We've taken bats, snakes, crayfish, you name it. The bullfrogs will eat. Now the pickerel frog, though, is notable in that it is toxic. And a lot of things can't eat them. And if you go into the cypress swamps around Robertson's Mill Pond area, above it and below it, you'll find that the pickerel frog is probably the most common frog you'll find there. It may be because a lot of the snakes and birds and stuff that eat other frogs don't eat them. But you can hold one in your hand. I wouldn't rub it a whole lot and then rub your eye or something like that. But I've never known any problem with catching them. And I've got a pickerel frog up here you can see. It's about a half-grown juvenile you can take a look at. All these are fish tolerant. Bullfrog tadpoles, they taste really nasty and fish don't eat them. Green frog tadpoles are smart enough that they manage to avoid the fish. I guess they're sharp-eyed and they go run hide if the fish gets close. Southern leopard frog tadpoles seem to do the same thing. They're good at evading. And the pickerel frog tadpole, I'm not really sure about, but they're typically in habitats where there are fish. And so they manage it. Now let's look at a few smaller frogs. Back in the winter, when the spring peeper starts to call, you may hear a call that sounds sort of like dragging your thumbnail over a comb. That'll be your upland chorus frog. Oh, about an inch to inch and a quarter in body length. And so they're winter breeders. And when you move over to the summer, we have a very common little frog here that a lot of times people don't see. It's called the narrowmouth toad. Got a little pointy snout, a little pointy head, a little fold right behind the eyes here. Looks like a little football. Tough. They love to eat ants. These are an ant specialist. And they can live in fairly dry areas, even though they're small, they have a tough skin. And they have a call. It's kind of like if you hold your nose and go, if you hear that, that's the narrow-mouthed toad. And around most any body of water, and they stray from water a good bit, your cricket frogs. The northern cricket frog is the one in this area. If you go a little bit further south and east, you get the southern cricket frog, a second species. But here it's the northern cricket frog. And they can be really thick around ponds. And they're fish tolerant in a way because, well, I'll show you a tadpole in a minute and give you a clue as to how they seem to manage that a bit. They have a lot of different color variations. They can be brown, they can have a reddish streak, a green streak, a yellow streak down the back, a little bit of a triangle between the eyes, and they're about an inch long body length as mature adults. Short-lived, 2 to 3 years max. So they have to have good reproduction to keep their populations going. They're another one of those things that a whole lot of things like to eat them. So I talked about fish tolerance, and there are two basic ways that happens. One is avoidance. A dusky salamander, which is common along many of our streams, and have a couple of those here for you to see also. And they're common around the edges of those cypress swamps along Buffalo Creek. They live in areas where there are fish, but they avoid them. They're typically on the bank or right in the edge of the water, or if they're in the water, they're under a log or a rock or something like that. The larvae of that southern two-line salamander lives right out there with the fish, but they're apparently real smart and sharp-eyed, and they can run, hide, and avoid being eaten. There's no indication that they're toxic at all. They just they manage to evade that. Talked about the bad taste or toxic, the toad tadpoles. There are 3 tadpoles down here. This is a gray tree frog tadpole. They can be beautiful things, but fish love them, and they're apparently sort of dumb as a post and don't know how to avoid being eaten. So they only breed in ponds where there are no fish. The tadpole in the back with the black tail tip, that's a cricket frog tadpole. So they've got this little flag that says, if you want to try to eat me, grab that. And something will be a bird or a big diving beetle or something to grab at them. And typically they grab at what they see best. That's the tip of the tail. So the tadpole then escapes and regrows another tail tip. So interesting strategy there. The other little tadpole here is the narrow-mouthed toad tadpole. And their strategy is, we're going to breed in a place where there are no fish, and we're going to grow really fast and get out of the pond. From egg laying to metamorphosis to a little bitty froglet or toadlet in the warm time of the year, summer, that can be as short as about 2 to 3 weeks. You get a rain puddle, it can be an old rut in a dirt road, and they'll breed in it, and those tadpoles grow really fast, and they will metamorphose and get out of there. So that's their strategy. Now we've got some neat turtles in the area. Most time when you're around the pond, the turtles you see are the ones that are either poking their head up out of the water, or they're crawled up on the bank or on a log or something to bask in the sun. Well, there's a species, the spotted turtle. It's a real neat little turtle. It's only about this big. It's one of our smaller species. They've been really popular in the pet trade. And where they occur out in this area and everywhere they occur is usually in high quality wetland habitats. Once you get a lot of disturbance, a lot of flooding and stuff, they can't deal with that. So where they still occur in Wake County, not nearly as many here now as there used to be, is in places like the cypress swamp at Robertson's Mill Pond, above and below that, along Buffalo Creek. There's some over along the Little River. But in bottomlands, wetland situations, hardwood swamp forest, that's typically where they're found. Hemlock Bluffs, if they visited there down on that bottomland, there used to be a pretty good population there. You still find 1 or 2 there, but not nearly as many as there used to be. And back around 1990, we had a commercial collector come into the state down in Terrell and Dare County area and collected over 900 of these in 1 year out of those roadside canals. Now, he knew how to find them, how to catch them. He was making big bucks on these. We managed to get some legislation through. Believe it or not, we had unanimous vote in favor of it in the North Carolina legislature. Now, how often does that happen? So that we got some protection for the turtles that were being over-collected way beyond what was sustainable in the state. But that collector, he was not happy that he got restricted, but he had 2 years worth of collecting numbers like that on a $5 permit. And so, okay. In your ponds around here, painted turtles will be really common. River cooters, of course, snapping turtles. There's a river cooter and a painted turtle out basking on a log. Sort of neat when they stick their feet out to like get the sun a little bit. And the yellow-bellied slider is another one that's very common in the area, and I got a young one here that you can take a look at. So the ones that you routinely see up basking, painted turtle, river cooter, yellow-bellied slider. Once in a while a snapping turtle will actually crawl out and bask, but most of the time they bask just at the surface of the pond. They'll stick their head up and you'll see the shell sort of bobbing as they breathe, but they don't normally crawl out on something and bask. And these snapping turtles, state record now is over 60 pounds. Your normal adult male is somewhere between about 20 and 30 pounds. Adult female is usually between about 10 and 18 pounds or so. The males get a lot bigger than the females. Back to something unique about Buffalo Creek in this area. Around 1988, 89, it was determined that we had 2 species of mud turtles in the state. Before that, we thought we only had one, the eastern mud turtle. And some of the variation we were seeing, we thought, well, it's just individual variation. But I was out doing some survey work for the Nature Conservancy at Nags Head Woods on the coast. And I was catching these mud turtles. Some of them had a hint of a stripe down the middle of the back. And they had more markings on their head like this musk turtle or stink pot down here. These stripes on the head. The people at Nags Head Woods, they say, oh, we've got stink pots here. And I say, no, 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 they don't occur on the Outer Banks. They said, well, yes, they do. We've got them here. I said, okay, we're going to be trapping turtles. They put out turtle traps, caught turtles, and caught these mud turtles with stripes on the head. And then I caught mud turtles like this that didn't have stripes on the head. These are eastern mud turtles here and here. And I go, wait a minute. Something's going on here. So there was a couple researchers down at the Savannah River Ecology Lab near Aiken, South Carolina. They had published a paper saying that we've got striped mud turtles there in southern South Carolina. And they came up with this formula about this long. They called it a differential function analysis. And if you measured about a dozen characters on the turtle shell and plugged it into that formula, if the end number you got was less than 1, it was one species. If it was more than 1, it was the other species. So I got my calipers out and I measured and stuff, and sure enough, our turtles that we had here came out as striped mud turtles and eastern mud turtles. So we packed up, got in touch with the folks down there that done research and packed up a whole bunch of turtles that we had at the museum and the research collection. We got Duke University's turtles and got Virginia folks to send turtles down from the southeastern corner of Virginia. And another publication came out extending the range of the striped mud turtle all the way up to the southeastern corner of Virginia. But in Wake County, the first one that was found was in Buffalo Creek. This is basically a southern turtle, a coastal plain turtle, but here a little bit of this coastal habitat. We have here, we have striped mud turtles there. And there's one that was from Robertson's Mill Pond, a young male. Nice pattern on the head, kind of like the musk turtle or stink pot, but with stripes on the shell. It's a striped mud turtle. If you go down into southern Florida, these stripes can be really bold, wide white stripes. Very obvious. But as you come up from Florida, they start getting less and less. And there are some striped mud turtles we see here that have no stripes on the shell. But you can tell by other characteristics what it is. And another difference, back up one here just for a second. There. Okay. The eastern mud turtle, uncharacteristically for aquatic turtles, winters on land. They crawl out of the pond, they go up in the woods, and they burrow down under the leaves or something for the winter. The striped mud turtle winters in the ponds and lakes like other aquatic turtles here. And of course, we got the eastern box turtle, the official North Carolina state reptile. It's fairly common in these areas. More common where you have good quality hardwood forest. They do occur in other mixed pine hardwood forests to a degree, but the best populations are usually in hardwood forest or near them. And they'll wander out some distance. The females, when they're going to lay their eggs, they may go a quarter or half a mile away from their home range where they live. They may come up in your yard where the sun gets to the ground and dig a hole and lay their eggs. We get a lot of phone calls at the museum about, hey, I got this turtle in my yard. It's digging a hole with its back legs. What's it doing? It's there to lay its eggs. Put this in just to make a point about wet bottomland hardwood forest. We've got wet areas. A lot of people look at this and say, oh, that's just a mosquito place. Well, it does breed a few mosquitoes, but if it's in good quality situation, there's enough predators in there, dragonfly nymphs and salamander larvae and things that eat mosquito larvae. The pond I've got behind my house, I've got enough things that eat mosquito larvae that it's a mosquito sink. Mosquitoes lay their eggs in there, nothing comes out. Where the mosquitoes are successful are in the gutters and the little flower pot bases and places where there's nothing there to eat them. And the little tiger mosquito we've got that's introduced to this country is a plague here now. Those things bite you in the middle of the day when it's sunny. And they'll breed in just a little skim of water. But this wetlands like this, the plant diversity, they're important for that, amphibian breeding habitat, flood control. When you get big rains and you've got these nice wide floodplains, the water can go out there and then go down slowly, so it decreases the flooding downstream, which can be quite important. I've seen a lot of examples along the Mississippi of what happens when it rains upstream this year, huge flooding situations. Also, it helps with your water table. Water that soaks in helps keep your water table higher in the area. Wells tend not to go dry as much if you keep the water table up. Bird and mammal habitat, lots of things live and feed in there. Lots of things like to eat those salamanders and frogs and stuff. So recreational activities, a lot of people like to hunt in areas like this. Bird watchers, if you like to go see the frogs and things, it can be wonderful places to go. And so your overall animal diversity is a lot on places like this. I'm not going to name all these. This is just amphibians that occur in this area that live and breed or use habitats like that. The list is quite extensive. Okay, hop over to lizards for a minute. How many people have anoles around your house? A lot of them. They're really neat, aren't they? They can be brown, and then if they get nice and warm in the sun, they'll turn green. Same animal can range from brown to green. Males have a reddish dewlap. You get a male that's trying to make another male go away and say, this is my territory, or trying to court a female, they'll bob their head and put the red dewlap out. They're neat critters. But they're basically a southern animal that now is much more common in this area than they used to be. Our mild winters have allowed them to survive better, and they don't know how to hibernate well. You can have a January day and it can be 32 degrees, but if it's sunny, one of these is likely to crawl out from wherever he is close to the surface and catch some sun. So that keeps them from going too far north because of their inability to hibernate well. You see lots of skinks, probably around your house. Little ones with bright blue tails. They've hatched recently, so there's a lot of little ones around now. But we got 3 species of larger skinks here. We got the broadhead skink. Adults of them can be a foot long or more. Males have a big reddish head in the breeding season, big wide head. If you catch one of those and he bites you, you can actually break the skin. He'll make you holler. This is a female here that I've had living around my house. I've seen her for the 3rd year in a row. And she's about a foot long. And she's still a young female, still got a little blue in her tail. The young of all 3 species have the blue tails. 5-line skink. Here's a male with a nice red head. And the southeastern 5-line skink, I don't have a picture up here, but all 3 of them are relatively common in this area. The broadhead skink, typically more so where you have mature woodlands close by, along the edge of those woods. If there's a big old log that's fallen down, it's a good place to see one of them laying up on the log basking. And then we have the little ground skink. It can be very common, but most of the time you won't notice it much. If you're walking in the woods, you may hear a little rustle in the leaves. And if you stand real still, chances are in a little bit you'll see it come out and it's working around trying to find some insects or something to eat. I see them in my yard when I'm mowing sometimes. I stop the mower and let the lizards get out of the way. But little ground skink, adult tail and haul's only about this big, a little thing. Now we're going to move into snakes for a little bit. Now there's about 37, by some people say 38 species. If they split the scarlet king snake and the milk snake into 2 species, let's just say 37. 6 species of venomous snakes in Wake County. In most areas, you've got 1 venomous snake to be concerned about. That's the copperhead. Now, if you're along Buffalo Creek, there are some cottonmouths. They're documented there since the late 1800s. And the Brimley brothers, first established in the museum. We got cottonmouth record, dates back that far. So they're there. There's a coastal snake, but we have a coastal plain habitat here, and the cottonmouths are there, and they've always been there, and they're still there now. I'm unaware of a documented bite from a cottonmouth in Wake County. I've looked at farm ponds along Buffalo Creek. You go back just a few hundred yards, and I'm yet to find a cottonmouth around one of those farm ponds. There are northern water snakes and red-bellied water snakes, but don't see any cottonmouths around those ponds. They seem to stay right down in that cypress bottom. Copperhead, the vast majority of snake bite in the eastern United States is copperhead bites. Death from a copperhead bite is almost impossible to find, extremely unlikely for somebody to die from a copperhead bite. We're very fortunate in that regard. The venom is relatively mild as far as venomous snake venom. And that doesn't mean it won't hurt, you won't swell up, and you better go get some medical attention. That's the way to get in trouble if you don't do that. So, copperhead's very common. It's been in the news a whole lot lately. And so we've got a lot of people, new people moving into the area, many of them from places where they're not used to having the chance of a snake crawling around in their yard. And we have a lot of non-poisonous snakes here, and many of them are beneficial. And so what we're going to try to do is talk about things you can do a little bit when identify a copperhead and how to avoid getting bit. But the best way to get bitten by one, if you want to get bitten, is to walk around this time of year about dusk to 2 or 3 hours after dark with flip-flops or barefooted without a flashlight. That's prime copperhead crawling time. That's when they're out looking for food, moving around. My wife, less than 2 weeks ago, was walking at dusk down to check her beehives. And I was in the house and my phone rang. And now, since I've gone back to work temporarily at the museum, I have 2 cell phones. Well, I was talking on one with a friend of mine, so I didn't answer it. And I knew she'd walked by just a couple minutes before, and then my other cell phone rang. And I saw her name on it. Okay, there's something going on here. So I answered, and she says, Copperhead. And so I told the fellow I was talking to, I said, I got to go. I got a copperhead in the yard. And so I went down there, and she had walked by this. She had her boots on, rubber boots. She knows to do that. And she'd walked by this snake apparently 2 times before she saw it in the grass. It was a nice little female about this big. Very polite copperhead. Never acted like it was disturbed, didn't try to strike or anything. I picked it up with a little snake hook and put it in a cooler and kept it for a couple days, took some nice pictures of it. It was always, you put it out, take pictures, like, okay, well, how would you want me to turn my head this time? This way or this way? And now, about 2 weeks before that, there was another little one about this big, right up beside the house. My wife hollered again, Copperhead. So I go out there, and it's crawling across the sidewalk, where it was just about to crawl into our garage. That was the meanest little copperhead. That thing, all it wanted to do was strike. It's like, leave me alone. And so they vary a bit just in temperament. First aid does not include a freeze kit. It can damage tissues more than you do good. Does not include a tight tourniquet, cut off blood flow and do more damage than you're doing good. Or X-shaped cuts. The old first aid manuals, you look at an old Boy Scout manual, tells you to do this X-shaped cut there. Don't do that. You do more tissue damage, and you can cut nerves and blood vessels and tendons, and it just don't do that. Identifying characters on snakes. You have pit vipers, copperhead, cottonmouth, and rattlesnakes. Have elliptical pupils like a cat's eye. They have heat-sensing pits between the eye and the nostril here on the side of the head, and this is a front view illuminated with a flash. Your non-venomous snakes have round pupils, and believe me, you can actually see that at a safe distance on many snakes. And no pits. There's a racer and a red-bellied water snake. Now, frequently when a snake's been killed, the head's not in great shape to tell what shape the pupils are in. That's just, I know that. But there's another character at the other end of the snake that you can look at. Your copperhead and your cottonmouth, the scales under the tail, behind the anus, are one row like they are under the belly plate. This is the cottonmouth here. See the wide belly plates? And then under the tail, it's one scale goes all the way across. Your non-venomous snakes have 2 rows of scales under the tail. There. So that's, you got some of these all messed up in the front, you can still go, say, oh, okay, it was a non-venomous snake. Shouldn't have killed it. So. I had 40 years with the museum before I retired. Did lots of answering snake calls and trying to identify snakes over the phone. One of the first things I found out that I needed to do was give a little tutorial on how to describe the snake that people were asking me what it is. And one is a band goes around the body, like on this copperhead, middle of the back here, a band. The ground color is the light color. The pattern is the dark color. People would say it's got diamonds down its back. Well, they were describing the light color. So say the light color is the ground color. Tell me what the pattern is, the dark color. So, blotches, stripe, run down the body like this. And sometimes you get sort of a combination of blotches and stripes. That's a bat snake that's from Seven Springs, about halfway between here and Wilmington. Copperhead. Said, what is it? Well, it says, copperhead. So I went down there, and it was under the apple trees, and kept it for a while and take some pictures of it. But it cooperated nicely is the best shot I've ever gotten of one with its tongue out, so you can actually see the forked tongue. And you can see the pits and the elliptical pupils. The tongue is harmless. They use that to taste the air. They pick up little particles, either out of the air or off the substrate. They bring it back into their mouth. There's a gland in the roof of the mouth called the Jacobson's organ. It's like the nasal epithelial that we use, dogs use, everything uses to breathe, or to smell with. And so they're smelling with their tongue. That's what snakes are doing, with flicking the tongue out. And if it's red, some species, copperheads have reddish tongues. Garter snakes have reddish tongues. Rat snakes have blackish tongues. It varies some between species, but it's all the same thing as what they use to taste the air with, or to smell. Copperhead occurs statewide. All those solid dots are voucher specimens in research collections documenting the distribution of species. You see a county up here that doesn't have a dot in it. The copperhead's there. We just don't have a record of it from there as a preserved specimen. Where we don't have copperheads in North Carolina is on the Outer Banks. No records. Roanoke Island, the Outer Banks, no records of copperheads. There are cottonmouths in several places out there. We've had a number of claims of copperheads, but it's people misidentifying a juvenile cottonmouth as a copperhead. Now, a copperhead typically has these bands that are wider on the side and narrow in the middle of the back. They can or cannot have a little marking between them. As you get into more western and northern areas, this little dot showing up between the bands is more common. If you go to more southern areas, most of the copperheads don't have that. It's just geographic variation. Typical copperhead, these bands, we've characterized them as hourglass shape, like a pair of old western saddlebags. I was reminded recently, my wife, she does a whole lot of work with kids, said, kids don't know what an hourglass is. They don't know what the shape of old saddlebags are, but they know what a Hershey's Kiss is. And so we're using that now. I'll show you a picture in a minute. Oh, back up one real quick. Got one thing here that's important. Baby copperheads, live birth, newborns having this nice yellow tail tip. So if you see a little snake about this big and he's got a yellow tail tip, it's either a baby copperhead or a baby cottonmouth. You don't have to worry about anything else. It's got a yellow tail tip. It's one or the other in this area. And young actually use that as a lure at times. I've had them photographed one sticking it up and weaving that. Because if he gets a little frog or something, think it's a worm, the frog will get close enough that the snake can eat it. Cottonmouths. Only place in Wake County we have documentation of them is here along Buffalo Creek. Lots of rumors of cottonmouths. There's rumors of cottonmouths in upstate New York, Wisconsin. There are water snakes there. Anywhere there are water snakes, you're going to get some people thinking, oh, water moccasin, venomous snake. But in Wake County, Buffalo Creek, the Little River just east of that, we think there's got to be cottonmouths there. We have no documentation of them. We've done a lot of work along Little River. Red-bellied water snake, northern water snake. If you go down further towards Smithfield, you pick up the banded water snake, starts to come in right around Smithfield. And but I don't know why. Along Little River and Wake County in this area, they haven't found any cottonmouths. The habitat would seem to be okay for them, but Buffalo Creek. Now, white in the mouth, call it a cottonmouth. Most snakes have a white lining in their mouth. Most of them just don't have a habit of showing it to you as a, say, a threat pose or a warning. Say, I'm here, don't step on me. Cottonmouths, see what these are doing? They turn their head up like this and get their mouth open. You can have a black rat snake that's trying to defend itself, and it'll look straight at you, and it may gape its mouth open like that, and it'll have a white lining in it. These looking sort of straight at you. Cottonmouth does this. And when they're swimming, they tend to swim high in the water, with about half their body above the waterline. Leisurely swimming. They can dive under the water if they're frightened or need to, but just leisurely swimming, about half the body up and the chin out of the water. Our water snakes, they swim with most of their body under the water, and the chin will be touching the water. If you see a snake swimming, he's got his head up like that, most of the body up, or a good chunk of the body up above the water, along Buffalo Creek, it's going to be a cottonmouth. Again, it's an eastern and southern snake. Right there's the dot for Buffalo Creek. That circles Raleigh. An old record dating back into the late 1800s, it said Raleigh. But we're confident that that snake didn't actually come from Raleigh. It probably came from out here, Buffalo Creek. And that one dot back in Chatham County is a snake that was crawling through some people's yard. It didn't belong there. It was not cottonmouth habitat. I don't know how that snake got moved. It was traveling. It was abraded on its belly where it had been moving. Somebody had gotten transported somehow, and it was just crawling through. But we got the snake. We know it was identified right. Went and talked to the folks. I investigated ponds and streams all in the area. That's not cottonmouth country. Have no clue how it got there. It didn't belong there, but it was cottonmouth. There's a quiz. How many snakes on that are not cottonmouths? Can I hazard a guess? Okay. Well, the answer's 2. Red-bellied water snake head here flared its jaws out a bit because it was disturbed trying to look mean. Nice round pupil, but red-bellied water snake. And that's a copperhead right there. The cottonmouth and the copperhead have a pattern that's very similar. They're in the same genus Echistrodon. Cottonmouth has a bigger, chunkier head. Here's a young cottonmouth with a yellow tail tip, newborn. Now what does happen with some regularity, and you'll see this along in the population along Buffalo Creek, if one has not shed recently, they tend to pick up stain on their skin, and it gets to where you can't see the pattern. You can get iron stain on them, and they even look reddish, like that. But once that snake sheds, it will look like that again for a while until it gets stained again. And that's the only place I know of in Wake County you'll find mud snakes, is along Buffalo Creek. Mentioned the rat snake before and put it in here because this is a snake that people see a lot. They're big, diurnal, day-active snake. They like to get in people's birdhouses and eat bird eggs and stuff. They occasionally get in a chicken house, called chicken snakes. They are widely distributed in the eastern U.S., over into Texas. Different color variants in different parts of the range. In North Carolina, the adults here are black. If you go down around Wilmington, the adults are greenish with dark stripes on them. And between here and there, there's this gradual changeover in the coloration of the adults. Now all of them hatch from eggs, and they look like this when they hatch. Little gray snakes with dark blotches on them. These are excellent climbers. They're built for climbing trees and getting up in the houses. If they've got a snake skin turns up in your attic, almost 100% chance it was a black rat snake. It was there. If mice can get in, the rat snake can get in. They love to eat mice. So, but we had one of these turn up in the maternity ward at Wake Hospital one time, a little one. It probably got there on its own volition. So, but these, a big rat snake can go, big male can go to 6 to 7 feet in length. Females usually top out around 4 to 5 feet or so. But it's a common snake. They're mostly active by day. Rarely do you see an adult active at night. If there's something's wrong that made it move. The young ones, hatchlings, will be active at night a little bit. Now, in addition, in the area where the cottonmouth occurs, and along all the streams, lakes, ponds, occasional swimming pool, you likely have the northern water snake turn up. They have bands, and they're usually in front of the body, that are wider in the middle of the back and narrower on the side, the opposite of a copperhead or a cottonmouth. And towards the back of the body, that breaks up into a dorsal blotch alternating with a lateral bar here. So the pattern's very much different. Now one, when it's being defensive, they can flatten their body and throw their jaws out to the side and look like it's got an arrow-shaped head. Any snake with a head wider than the neck looks sort of like an arrow-shaped head. So that's not the best characteristic to identify a venomous snake, saying it's got an arrow-shaped head. Now, a cottonmouth's got a big old chunky head on it, so it's a relative thing. But the northern water snake is very common here. And the red-bellied water snake. Now, this gets called copper-belly moccasin sometimes, because it has this reddish belly on it. The young look almost like a northern water snake, the newborns, and they get this more uniform brown color on the back with age. Usually by the time they're about 2 to 3 feet long, they'll look like the adults. And this is a water snake that gets further away from water on occasion than our other water snakes. I had a shed skin of one of these out beside my house about 3 weeks back. It was so fresh it was still moist. And I initially thought it was a rat snake shed skin. I picked it up, laid it in the garage so it could dry out a little bit. And days after that I picked it up and I looked at it and I thought, wait a minute. Now the keels are a little bit too strong on this. And I counted the number of scales around the middle of the body. They had 23. Well, a rat snake typically has 27. I know this because I've studied these things for so long. So I go back and check the book that's co-authored with Bill Palmer on reptiles in North Carolina just to verify that my memory was good, and sure enough, yep, it was a red-bellied water snake. 2 days after that, I was down by the little pond that I built for the frogs, and here was this about 4-foot red-bellied water snake cruising the edge of the pond chasing frogs. Right now I have a lot fewer frogs in that pond than I had before. How many people heard about the zombie snake in the news about a couple months back, a month or so back, something like that? I got interviewed by WRAL about the zombie snakes. Somebody thought it was a neat PR thing to the fact that the eastern hognose snake will play dead to call them a zombie snake, and it made national news. Poor hognose snakes. They got a real bad rap out of that. So I was trying to correct that and give them some decent information. They will flatten their head and they will hiss and try to fake you out like I'm really a bad thing, leave me alone. If that doesn't work, usually they start to thrash around like they've been mortally wounded. They'll flip over on their back, gape their mouth open, and if they've eaten something, they'll upchuck it. So, and apparently it does work some. So get things to leave them alone. But if that happens with one and he's like this, if you turn it upright, it'll flip back upside down. So I'm not really dead, but I need to be upside down, with the mouth gaped open and the tongue hanging out. These are egg layers. All the young have pattern on them when they hatch. About 40% of the population in the coastal plain, about 30% in the Piedmont, and about 20% in the mountains, as adults, will be black. Turn black as they get older. Why? I have no idea. It's one of those things, I'm sure there's a reason for it, but that reason may have been a few thousand years ago or something, who knows. And but now we see no real reason why that occurs, but it does. But nice turned up nose, that's the name hognose snake, and they love to eat toads. That's their favorite food. Another snake that's becoming rare in Wake County is the ribbon snake. They are along Buffalo Creek and Little River, found there just recently. Beautiful little snake, nice clean-cut stripes on it. Sometimes gets mistaken for a garter snake, which has more of a checkerboard pattern between the stripes. But the ribbon snake has this little white spot right in front of the eye. It's distinctive. If you catch something that's long and thin with stripes on it, has that white spot, it's a ribbon snake. They love wetlands, eat small frogs, little fish. So freshwater marshes and places are a great place to find a ribbon snake. There we go. Eastern king snake. That's the snake that's supposed to eat venomous snakes. Yes, they will eat a copperhead. They will eat a cottonmouth. They'll also eat a green snake, a garter snake. They eat turtle eggs. They eat mice. They eat lizards. A wide variety of things. They do have some immunity to the venom. So it's built into the genetic structure of many snakes to be afraid of king snakes. Had a situation before with snakes in captivity. Feeding a mouse, you put a mouse in with the king snake, it didn't eat it. But it's in the cage, rub around, take it out, put it in with a corn snake that has been a wonderful feeder. And the corn snake smells the king snake on the mouse and panics and starts crawling rapidly around the cage and won't eat the mouse. And so it's been a long relationship of king snakes eating other snakes to the point that another snake, many of them don't ever have to encounter it. It's built into their genetics that smell is something dangerous. Lots of little species of snakes. Worm snakes, ringneck snakes, green snakes, northern brown snake, rough earth snake, northern red belly snake, there's a queen snake. City lots in this area. You go Wendell, you got a vacant lot with a little bit of trash laid around, a few boards or something. What you're most likely to find is a northern brown snake and a rough earth snake. Little species about this big. I once found 46 of these in a vacant lot in Raleigh within 30 minutes. It's just, they can be quite common. They are absolutely harmless. They couldn't hurt you if they wanted to. Safety practices. Basically learn to identify the venomous snakes in your area. Here, by and large, it's the copperhead. In this one area along Buffalo Creek, add the cottonmouth to that. You see other species, it's nothing to worry about. Avoid careless contact with venomous snakes, walking around after dark with exposed feet and no light. That's the best way to get in trouble. My house around it's a good example.
We need a map to your house.
Pardon?
We need a map to your house. None of us
Keep your yard clear of debris and vegetation that provides cover. Do not panic if someone is bitten. Note the time of the bite and get medical treatment. A light constricting band that does not restrict blood flow may be applied to an arm or leg. But copperhead bite is not a life-threatening situation. It is not to be ignored. That's where you get in trouble. Get medical attention. A lot of times now the doctors like to use anivanine. Years ago, didn't use it so much. Had the old horse serum, and there's a lot of reaction to that. So, but most, I worked with a physician about 30 years ago to do a safety program for emergency medical folks in the southeastern U.S. Had a conference over at Duke. And he was doing the treatment of the snake bite, and I was doing identification. And I remember him saying that copperhead bite typically is a self-limiting injury. And so you treat the symptoms, you treat if anivanine, if it looks serious enough, you antibiotics for secondary infection, but you're going to get over it. And most of the time with no permanent injury. The worst injury I've seen on somebody, a friend of mine, who was mistreated with a copperhead bite, and he had 255 stitches in his arm because a physician opened it up to relieve the swelling. without checking internal pressure to see if it was even necessary. And so, don't get bitten by one's the best thing. Don't get bit. Okay, how do you do that around? If you got firewood, you got outbuildings and stuff, I build stuff up, like elevate outbuildings, decks, so predators can get access to it. So venomous snakes will be reduced by that. Possums love to eat copperheads. They have some immunity to the venom, and the copperhead runs across, or the possum runs across the copperhead, that's food. So if you give them access, you're less likely to have a copperhead taking up residence there. All right. Advance. There we go. Firewood racks up off the ground. Reduce the instance of copperhead occurrences. It's fewer places for them to hide. You got a big pile of wood just laying on the ground, it's a great place for things to hide. There's a lot of food in there that a copperhead would like to eat. So if you block it up, the wood stays drier, it's better for using it, for burning, it doesn't rot as quick. So I got these, built a couple of these in my house. All right, okay. There are things between other than amphibians and reptiles. Along Buffalo Creek, there are 2 species of terrestrial leeches there. I bet you didn't know there are terrestrial leeches in this area. I brought one here tonight that you can see. These eat things whole. Big Haemophilus septagon, big terrestrial leech, sucks down earthworms whole. They're not bloodsuckers. So you can hold one and there's no chance it's going to bite you or something. Now we do have a lot of blood-sucking leeches around here too, but these are not it. The first reproductive information for that species is we got from some animals in the last couple of years, or 3 years actually, here in North Carolina. Back in the mid-70s, I collected what was the type specimen for the description of this Haemophilus septagon, that terrestrial leech. Philipdella floridana, there's no common names for these. There's another terrestrial leech that lives, and both these live sort of in that edge of the high quality bottomland wetlands. And where there's a lot of earthworms and things, but if there's a log sort of half in and half out of the water, that may have one of these leeches hiding under it where it can get after earthworms. And the first reproductive information for both these species came from this area. Here we go. There. Can you identify that snake? All right. Remember that. That's important. That was my wife's suggestion. She said that kids know what a Hershey's Kiss is. That picture's gone, I think, viral in some areas. I keep hearing about it turning up in places. But that was on my dining room table where that was taken. Very cooperative little copperhead. No, I did not push those kisses up there with my fingers. I did not do that. One thing I'm proud of and intend to keep that record. Now, 50 years plus, working with snakes of all kinds and many hundreds of copperheads and rattlesnakes and cottonmouths and things. I haven't been bitten by a venomous snake. How do I do that? I'm careful. I understand their capabilities and I stay outside of those capabilities. So it's anybody that goes around bragging about getting bitten by a venomous snake, it's kind of like a carpenter bragging about cutting his finger off with a chop saw. But why would you do that? So, Robertson's Mill Pond. If you haven't been there, visit. If you like to canoe and kayak, it's a great place. You might see a cottonmouth there. If you do, just look at it, appreciate it, and leave it alone. It's not going to come chasing you. You're too big. These things like that, they're in the business of survival. It doesn't pay to go around picking on things bigger than you are. So, but if threatened, you're stepping on one, they will do the best they can to defend themselves. So just don't step on them.
Do they
Okay.
climb trees?
Cottonmouths do that extremely rarely. They're sort of thick, clumsy snakes. If you see it, yeah, kayak, most of what gets up high enough that it could fall in your boat is going to be a water snake. If you're down in coastal areas, the brown water snake is notorious for climbing out on a limb and going to sleep. And you come on and you shake the limb and then fall in the boat and stuff. That's usually a brown water snake. Cottonmouth, it's extremely rare for one to get up high enough to where it could fall into a boat. I've seen a couple instances out of many hundreds of them. There was one I saw on a limb about this high off the ground. It was late in the day and it had to climb up there to get some sun. So it had managed. It was a young one, but it climbed up on a limb about that high. But most time it's on a much more solid substrate. Okay, I've got some critters up here. I'd be happy to show them to you, talk to you about, be happy to answer any questions you can. If you haven't visited the museum, come visit us. We have live snakes down there. We have a whole lot of dinosaurs. We have lots of neat things at the Museum of Natural Sciences. Yes?
Very interesting. Thank you first for coming and speaking with us. This is a singular treat. I've been a fan of yours for a while, and a North Carolina native that loves creatures and critters, and particularly those inhabiting Buffalo Creek. So thank you very much for coming and presenting. We're very interested in the striped mud turtle. For me, telling the difference between mud turtles and musk turtles, I always relied a lot on the color of the shell. It seemed like musk turtles were usually black and mud turtles were brown. Is that true, or is that just...
To a degree, yes. Between the eastern mud turtle and the musk turtle. The musk turtle will have that darker shell, and the eastern mud turtle a lighter shell. But with the striped mud turtle, the shell tends to be darker also.
So it does look almost black.
Yeah, yes, it does. But if you turn it over and you look at the belly, the musk turtle has a much reduced plastron with sort of a fleshy strip down through the middle on most of them. Whereas the mud turtle has a more like a box turtle. It's got a bigger plastron and it's got two hinges on it. The back can fold a little bit and the front can fold down. So that bigger, you look at the belly and you know it's a mud turtle or a musk turtle real quickly.
It's interesting, I catch a lot of them by hand and sometimes fishing. They got hair and beak marks in the shell. It looks like they live a very perilous existence.
Yeah, I've seen a number of that things where they escaped something pecking at them. You get a great blue heron with that blade it's got on it, they can do some damage. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you for coming.